Well, just a reminder for those of you who might not have been here last week, this is our second Sunday in 5 Sundays of bread sermons. And they're almost exactly the same gospel story for the next few weeks. So some very kind parishioner this morning delivered something to inspire me. Loaf of bread. So I thought I would tell a stupid joke. What did one Episcopal loaf of bread say to the other one? How many more weeks of this do we have? The response being, what do you think he's going to talk about next week? And the loaf says, whatever it is, it'll be like most of his sermons, half-baked. So, number 2. Before I talk about the readings, I want to just say, which I always do when I'm talking about John's Gospel, is that we need to pay attention to John's bias in writing his Gospel. John wrote his Gospel probably 70 or 80 years after Jesus' death. And that Gospel has in it a reflection of the deep divisions that had then, by that time, been part of the history of our faith. And that is that there was a deep division between traditional Judaism and the followers of Jesus. And John comes out of that conflict. So his gospel continually speaks about the Jews as being somehow an outside group, apart from Jesus and his disciples, people that were over there that did not follow Jesus. And it's important to remember that's actually a false historical perspective, because they were all Jews. So to talk about the Jews in a way that seems to separate them from Jesus gives us the wrong impression and is historically false. It reminds me of the debate among historians about what Paul Revere said on the night of his famous ride. Supposedly, Paul Revere said, "The British are coming, the British are coming." And historians have pointed out that most people would have turned over in their bed and gone back to sleep because they were all British. What he might have said is the British Army is coming, but we have the British are coming. Another false distinction in my book. But anyway, you have bread again this week, this story of bread. And I wanted to think about the process, not that I've ever made a loaf of bread, but I understand from watching baking shows that it's an involved process. If it's a yeast-based bread, it has to go through several steps of rising and being proved and then rising again. It is a process in bread making. And much like that, it's not a bad image, therefore, to remind us about the process, the journey of our faith. Our faith does not occur in a moment, but is part of a narrative of our lives. We have a past, a present, and a future that is intimately connected to who we are as a people and our faith. And to think about the moment that we're in now as being on its own, a standalone moment in our lives, is also false. We are all of us in process. That's certainly true in the Jewish Testament reading that we just heard. In this, for a bit of context, what's happened is Absalom, who is the chosen boy, he is David's favorite, he's handsome, witty, charming, great at everything a future king should be. But he's also very susceptible to flattery. And people come to him saying, why should we wait for your father to die, for you to become king? Why don't you become king now, Absalom? So Absalom launches an attempt to overthrow his father and to seize power himself. and a civil war erupts. And in that war, Absalom and his followers are defeated by David's forces at a terrible cost. And for David, the terrible cost is the death of his son, that even though he had betrayed David, David still loved him as a father. So there is a sweep in the narrative, as there always is in the Bible stories, of what happened before, what happens now, and what's to come. We know this for the last Sundays when we've heard the complicated story of David's character. A great king, but also someone who was deeply flawed and made many terrible mistakes. So in thinking about progress and thinking about how we move through our lives, both physically as well as spiritually, it's important to always remember the narrative of who we are. Well, interestingly, we at St. Peter's here have reminders of our narrative as a congregation. It also has to do with bread. So on either side of the sanctuary windows, on one side you have wheat, sheaves of wheat, and on the other side you have corn, both things of which bread are made. And it reminds us, first of all, about our agrarian roots as a congregation. This was a church built for farmers that were here many, many decades, even centuries ago. And of course, that's changed. We are a different congregation. The parish is in a different place in terms of who's here. Millbrook is in a different place. It's part of a narrative of who we are. But we retain part of that identity. It's intentional and it's protected, but we see ourselves and are, in many ways, a rural community. I was reminded of this when I first got here and in talking to Mike and Laura about the many things I should keep in mind about the building, about things I should be aware of, where keys are, where light switches are. They also told me what to do if the cows get out of the field and are in the churchyard. It's something that luckily I haven't had to practice yet, but I know what to do. You apparently speak to them very, very sternly and they go away. But it's part of who we are and this place and the place that we love and the community we love and our history. And it's true for us personally as well. Each of us have our personal story, our narrative, the process in which our life is unfolding. Just in the same way that David's life unfolded in the Jewish Testament, so too our life unfolds with wonderful moments of joy, but also tragedies as well. So what do we do to be the living bread, to embrace our story and our narrative in an intentional way? Well, luckily, the Bible, which is often complex and confusing, is very clear on this point. You must love God and love your neighbor as yourself. That's all. That's what's required of us in our relationship with God. And it comes straight from the Jewish tradition. It's something that Jesus, when he's asked to say, what's the most important law? It's what he cites. And what we have to do, therefore, is ground our faith in trust and faith in God, and also in the love that we show for ourselves, for people in this community, and in the wider world. We are meant to be the living bread that sustains community. Now, the letter to the Ephesians talks about this beautifully in talking about community and saying, you must treat each other kindly, with patience and respect. What I love is, they say, the writer says, it's okay to be angry, but don't let your anger remain. and don't hurt each other in your life together. And that's an important part, and it's a creed, it's a foundation of who we are here at St. Peter's. But it's equally true that we're meant to serve and love the world. We're not meant to be a self-contained narrative that we keep and hold, but that we offer the story of love that we have found here in this place to the world, both in terms of witness and in terms of work that we do. The idea of loving our neighbors, serving the world in need, is a fundamental part of who we are. And so what I'd say this Sunday is be intentional. As Jesus says again and again, be awake to this moment. And also be awake to your narrative, to your story, to your own process. Be aware of your past. Be aware of how you feel and what your life is like now, and what your hopes are for the future. And if you love God, love one another, and serve the world, all will be well. Amen.